I'd like to explain how I'm going to get your mark in courses, engineering science courses, like for example MEC 241. Just about always you'll have a series of assignments, some quizzes or midterms, and a final exam with multiple different problems on it. I've got to put all of those together to somehow come up with a final mark for you. The way I usually do that, I'll take all of your assignments and average them together to get an overall assignment mark. I'll take each of your quizzes individually and carry them forward. And I'll take each of the problems on the final exam and add them all together to get a final exam mark. Now those will be split among some fraction, typically about half for the final exam, a fair bit for the quizzes, and about 10% for the assignments. Now one thing I always do, I'm really interested in what you're able to do by the time you get to the end of the course. So if you reach the end of the course and on this final exam you've done really well, then I'm willing to take that final exam mark and substitute it in up here for any of these things that you may have done during the term, your assignments or your quizzes, and use the final exam mark instead. That inevitably brings everybody's mark up if I give you the best of the two. So that helps you out a little bit. I'll sum all of these up and I'll get a course mark. Now once I've got that mark, I've got a measure of how well you performed in the course, and I can certainly make that mark go up, and I'll guarantee you that I won't make that mark go down. And based on my experience, once I do this exercise, I've probably got all of you in the right order. So the people with the higher marks are the people who deserve to have the higher marks, and the people with the lower marks didn't do quite as well as the people with the higher marks. Now if I take those marks, whether they're percentages or letters or whatever, and plot them eventually on a letter grade basis, because that's what I've got to give to the registrar, I'll see a distribution of marks. Now what I'd like to see, because you people are all pretty smart, I figure that probably on average you ought to come in somewhere around a B. That's where the middle of the class probably is, based on past experience and the good quality students who come into Queen's. And some of you are going to do better than others and get an A, and some of you not so well and get a C. That's what I think is probably your ability. Now there are a bunch of things that may conspire to have us wind up with marks that don't quite match that distribution, where about a third of you are in each of these A, B, C categories. And of course there are pluses and minuses on these when we get into details. But let's look at the big picture for now. What will probably happen is that most of you will have messed up one question on the final, or maybe made a couple of smaller mistakes on the final, and that makes it really hard to get an A if you're already looking at having lost 15% of the marks just on a couple of mistakes there. So A's are really hard to get, so I'm probably going to wind up with, in the raw analysis, something like that for A's, less than 20% of you with A's. And I'll probably wind up with a similar number, maybe a few more with B's, because this is a hard course. What I expect to see is I'll see a lot of people with C's and still a reasonable number with D's. There are going to be some people who either just didn't get the course or who had a really bad day on the final, and they're going to wind up down here with F's, really low F's, or they might be here in the FR category, which allows you to write the supplemental exam. Now, this distribution is what will probably come out from the kinds of measurements that we've traditionally done in engineering science type courses. What I'd really like to have is I'd like to have something like this. And I'll look at your performance and I'm going to adjust these marks to make sure that I'm getting closer. Now I can have some effect by the instructions that I give to the TAs and the things that I do when we're marking the final, particularly in the quizzes and the assignments. So we can improve on that a little bit. But I'll still want to make sure that we're recognizing those of you who do a really good job and get some A's and some A pluses up in here. So there's several things I can do. One is I can pull up the top end. I can look at all of the people who were in this upper part of the graph, and I can just move everybody up a little bit. I can pull up the middle. And take everybody who was in the middle, these people in the B, C, and D range, and move them up a little bit too, in some kind of smooth way to get them up into the range where things really belong. And finally, these people down here, really, most of them probably don't need to repeat the course, but they do need to spend some more time looking at the material and learning it a little better than they did by the time they came to write this final exam. So I'd really like to see a lot of these people move into the category where they're allowed to write the supplemental exam. So I can also apply some math to try to pull the bottom end up. So once I do that, I hope that what I'll wind up with probably is going to be something that looks more like this. There'll be a few people, usually people who didn't write the final or who didn't do any of the work during the term, who just can't get it together and they really need to repeat the course. There will be a larger portion that still didn't provide enough evidence that they learned the material, but that deserve the opportunity to write a sup. And the advantage of writing the sup is, once you get that supplemental, it substitutes for the final. And that all goes in there. And as a result, it goes up here, and up here, and up here, possibly even up here. And so by going from here with a mark in the 40s, you can very quickly, if you actually get the mastery of the material by September, wind up with a mark in the 70s or even in the 80s. So this is the route that people who are having trouble at the end of the term will follow, and total opportunity to make your transcript look way better. I'm hoping that there will hardly be anybody still left here in the D range, and that we'll have moved towards something that's approaching these targets that I had. Over here. And I can only do so much for you to help you bring that up, but I really want all of you to be up in these target ranges here. And I really want to work with you during the term so that by the time we get to the final exam, you can all do the questions that you need to do, get good answers to these problems, if not every one of them, at least enough of them that we can get you into this zone up here, because that's where I'd like you to be. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you about marking.